Hello and a warm welcome to episode 6 of the policing TV series, Manifesto for Change, Preventing Male Violence in Policing. I'm Professor Tim Grant and I'm Professor of Forensic Linguistics and Director of the Aston Institute for Forensic Linguistics at Aston University in Birmingham in the UK. I'm going to be your chair for this session. This is the last in our current series of episodes. We will explore here the international perspectives of male violence within policing, and we'll be drawing on a range of expert evidence from inside and outside of policing to engage in informed debate. Throughout 2021, the policing of violence against women and girls has become under significant scrutiny in the UK. There is acknowledgement that in UK police forces, there is consistent failures to protect women and girls from sexual violence and violent crime, and from violence at the hands of police officers and their staff. Many have compared the kidnap, rape and murder of Sarah Everard as a watershed moment for policing in the UK in a similar way to the murder of Stephen Lawrence. The gap between what the public need from policing and what they get, especially for women, for people of colour, and from those from marginalised communities, has grown significantly. Trust, confidence and legitimacy for many in policing is broken. Within this context, the intention for each of our episodes has been to explore how policing actually works so we can better understand why it goes wrong and whether there are solutions that can address systemic failings. Our aims are to identify recommendations and create radical and deliverable interventions through open discussion and debate. This panel is going to be discussing the Manifesto for Change, the international context of male violence in policing. The focus of the episode will be on understanding the context in different international jurisdictions, including addressing if and how male violence in policing manifests itself worldwide, evidencing what works in tackling such violence, and asking where opportunities are to make changes and how applicable any such changes are for policing in the different jurisdictions. I'm delighted to be joined by a panel of experts for this episode, and I'll now introduce each panel member. So we have with us today May-Britt VR Ronnebro. May-Britt is Superintendent and Senior Advisor on Crime Prevention at the Swedish National Police. She has 45 years experience of policing in different roles on local, regional and national levels. Between 2002 and 2010, she was an internal investigator of crimes committed by police employees. Her brief also included crimes committed by prosecutors and judges at district and appeals courts in Sweden, and she additionally conducted interrogations on behalf of the Ombudsman of Justice. May-Britt is Secretary General of the International Executive Board of the International Police Association, and she's also former President of IPA in Sweden. She maintains partnerships with other international associations related to the policing profession, including the International Education Center in Gimborn, Germany, the World Association of Detectives, the International Association of Women in Policing, and the Society of Evidence-Based Policing in the UK. She is a member of Cambridge University's Criminology Institute Advisory Board for the Police Executive Programme. We also have with us Susan Rabichuk from Canada. Susan is passionate about mental health, workplace mental health, policy and programme evaluation and research. She is currently PhD student in the Department of Community Mental Health Sciences within the Rady Faculty of Medicine in Manitoba, Canada. She obtained a Master's of Social Work at the University of Manitoba, completing a CIHR, a Canadian Institute of Health Research funded thesis that focused on female police officers' experience of psychological stress and the impacts of overall mental health. Susan is also a member of the Programme and Policy Evaluation Research Group and the Alliance Against Violence and Adversity, Health and Social Sciences research training platforms for the system and population transformations in girls' and women's health. When not engaged in her academic pursuits, Susan draws upon her past work experience in law enforcement and corrections, working as a mental health clinician and acting as the clinical team lead at the Crisis Response Centre, as well as a peer support member with the Critical Incident Stress Management Team at the Health Services Centre. Susan is a former Canadian police officer. Christine Townsend is the North American and Caribbean writer for Policing Insight and has over 20 years experience in crisis and emergency communication, as well as in shaping the digital policing narrative in the UK. As one of the founding teams to bring social to the public sector, Christine has trained emergency services and government agencies across the world in how to engage with the public through digital channels. With previous experience as a national newspaper journalist and as a special constable, Christine has worked to bridge the gap between public and police through better communication. In the UK, she has also worked with the Ministry of Justice, Home Office and Cabinet Office to handle both national and international criminal justice issues. In 2016, she moved to Aston, Texas, and has since founded the PIOtoolkit.com, a resource for the public sector media and communications profession. She's a master of the Chartered Institute of Public Relations and is currently studying for a master's in journalism with New York University. Grace Long, ACP Grace Long, is a trainer, policymaker and administrator with the Nigerian police force. She is currently Director of Research, Policy and Planning in the National Institute of Police Services at Ajuba, Nigeria. Her 25 years policing experience spans across almost the entire policing department. She is a veteran United Nations peacekeeper from 2004 and 2005. She holds an MA in Police Studies and Conflict Transformation from the University of Rwanda and a CMI Level 7 Diploma Certificate in Strategic Management and Leadership and a BA in Communication Arts from the University of Uyo, Nigeria. As a female law enforcement professional, her research revolves around improving law enforcement responses to sexual assault, domestic violence through effective partnerships as a conflict transformation mechanism. She has traveled widely through Russia, Germany, UK, China, the USA, and Rwanda, and is still dedicated to acquiring and disseminating knowledge on various topics of interest. JaneTurner from the United States is a whistleblower and highly decorated 25-year veteran of the FBI as a special agent. She was the first woman named as a head of an FBI resident agency, and Jane led the FBI's highly successful programs to combat crimes against women and child sex crime victims on the North Dakota Indian reservations. She won awards for successfully investigating significant crimes on the Fort Berthold Indian Reservation, and federal prosecutors described her as the leading FBI agent in solving child crimes in the entire United States. This provoked retaliation for her efforts, and Jane was removed from her position by the FBI. But years later, Jane would win historic decisions for all FBI whistleblowers. A court held that JaneTurner set forth sufficient facts to justify a trial by jury for her allegations, and Jane also successfully challenged her retaliation in federal court to obtain the largest compensatory damage award permitted under the law for federal employees. Since becoming a whistleblower advocate, Jane has served as chair of the Whistleblower Leadership Council at the National Whistleblower Centre and is a member of its board of directors. Jane's weekly column, Whistleblower of the Week, highlights the stories of whistleblowers who have stood up to massive corruption, fraud and abuse. So, a very warm welcome to you all, and thank you very much for taking the time to join us today in our discussions. We'll begin with our key focus on the areas outlined in the title of this episode, the international context, and the focus will be on understanding the contexts in which the focus will be on understanding the context from within different international jurisdictions, including if and how male violence in policing manifests itself, evidencing what works from different experiences in different jurisdictions and where opportunities may be and how applicable they are for policing around the world. So Christine, I'll come to you first from the UK. What do you feel the scale is of male violence within policing from within the UK policing, and how is its impact understood within the UK policing service, do you think? Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Thanks for having me. I'm honoured to be amongst such a wonderful group of people to be discussing this issue. And It is more widespread than people realise or perhaps even care to admit. Anecdotally, professionally and personally, I've experienced countless incidents of this. And like many police officers, I come from a family of police officers, and so this is not just a now issue. This has been going on for a long time, and I'm surprised that the policing is now only just having its Me Too movement when this should have been its Me Too moment, when this should have been brought up so long ago. I hate to use the word, and I'm sad to use the word, but I believe it to be endemic. I believe that the tip of the iceberg is what is out there in the media, and it's only now that it's being brought to the forefront. I would argue that as a result of this, it really isn't being dealt with as it should be. People are starting to take notice, but this is an incredibly complicated and nuanced issue that doesn't just come down to gender. It comes down to so many factors that I think that it's almost the too difficult light has already come on, and it's taking a lot of bravery to bring it forward and to deal with it head on. And this is the massive challenge ahead. However, that said, I am pleased that finally I can speak about it openly.
Okay, thank you, Christine. Grace, if I ask you a similar question, how do you feel what the scale is of the problem of male violence from within policing is in Nigeria, and how broadly is it understood from within the Nigerian police force?
Thank you so much for having me on the program, and it's good to meet a whole lot of women who have a lot of experience. I'm really looking forward to learning a lot. Male violence in policing, like Christine said, is not a new concept. And in the Nigerian context, because the Nigerian police force actually was established has its roots from the Britons. Remember the Britons colonized Nigeria. So they actually established the Nigerian police force, and a whole lot of there has not been too many changes from what they left with us. So the system has actually been majorly that of the British, running with very little variance, because the process of changing our laws are really very cumbersome. And we have recently in 2020, the Police Act and Regulation, which was promulgated in 1947, has just been amended. But even at that, there's still a process going on again to review what has been done, because there were certain, salient areas which were left silent. And so, but most importantly, let me bring your attention to the aspect of where women police have to apply for marriage. They have to present their would-be spouses for investigation. I want to believe the original idea was to protect the woman. But, understanding this from our own, from the current, reality, women and men need to be protected. So why and I don't want to also divorce it from the general belief that women are weak. We are the weaker sex, so why do you just assume that when you have women, doing what men are doing and even doing it much better now? So why do you have to subject women to presenting their would-be spouses for investigation, and then all the background checks. And then so a man could just, in the first place, they will not even recruit a married woman into the police. It's one of the, conditions where a woman that is married cannot be recruited. And after recruitment, you have to serve the force for like 2 years plus before you can now get married. And when you now want to get married, they have to investigate your spouse. So all of these rigors are a lot for the woman. Now look at the current realities. You don't even need to have sex now to have children, to get pregnant. So what happens, we have had a lot of our women, senior women police who worked for 35 years and retired, and they go home without a child. They go home very lonely. Nothing to keep them company. I mean, that's a lot of, so this is just one of the aspects. And our patriarchal system where, everything comes from the man. Yeah. The woman has to be submissive to the man. The woman, the children in the marriage answer the man's name. The woman has to give her name, her father's name, up for the man's name when she's married. That's the patriarchal nature in Africa. So I think all of these have their roots from there.
Yeah. So do you see in the Nigeria, with this context that you've described, do you see actual male police officer violence against female colleagues or against the civilian population as being a specific problem in Nigeria, or what is it recognized to be a problem, do you feel?
It has been recognized to be a problem. That is why the force management team has taken a lot of steps. Like, we are in the process of validating the force gender policy. We had a gender policy in 2010, but that gender policy, the women whose issues that policy is supposed to address were not a part of putting it in place. Mm-hmm. That is why the current management team took this step to review it. And here in this particular one, we were sufficiently carried along. We had a good time looking at the issues from different perspectives, and we are in the process of validating it right now. So it's the force management team has recognized it as a problem. And so they have taken this step to be able to put things right.
Okay, well, we'll come back in a minute. I want to go around the world, so to speak, to get the perspectives from other contexts. Susan, perhaps I can come to you now from Canada, as the original question is about the scale of male violence within policing, within your context, from your perspective, and how you understand how it's understood by the police or the police services or forces in that context.
Sure. So I think in Canada, we don't even recognize, we can't even quantify what the issue is, because there is no data provided from policing organizations at all about this. So we have our federal level of government, a provincial level of government, municipal, and there's over 200 policing organizations in Canada, and they're governed by different provincial acts, different pieces of legislation. So they kind of can all do their own thing, so to speak. And again, there's no data that's produced and a lack of transparency. So different organizations will come out with kind of these illusory initiatives that say we're all about equity, diversity. They'll come out as a response to things that occur in the media for whistleblowers, but none of these initiatives, to my knowledge, are being evaluated or made transparent. And just like you said, Grace, the key players or women who've come forward and helped to create some of the policies and change, they're not included at the table in terms of actually implementing that change and evaluating it and making sure that it is in fact having the intended impact it was designed to have. So I see a lot of it as damage control as opposed to an actual invested interest in creating change. And those who are whistleblowers, women in the police and other marginalized groups, they face such extreme retaliation for coming forward with their stories that it really signals to other women or marginalized groups in policing, you best be careful, because we'll take your job, we'll take your, the psychological, emotional, cognitive, and physical abuse that comes after reporting is horrendous. So I say, if, you know, marginalized groups or women in policing can't get justice for themselves, what's happening in the community when they go out, you know, policemen go out to these calls. So not only is this a female issue, this should also be a red flag for a lot of men who are excellent officers, who are upstanding, they're ethical, because now it's tarnishing all of police.
Okay, thank you, Susan. Jane, perhaps I'll turn to you next, in that kind of neighbourly way between Canada and the United States. So what do you feel the scale of this as a problem is across the UK, across USA law enforcement? You've had your experience in the FBI, but again, you have many jurisdictions across the United States. So what do you feel the scale is of male violence from within policing, and how is it understood? What are the sort of responses that you hear?
Thank you, Tim. And hello, my friends. I want to particularly say hello to this esteemed panel that you brought together. It's very impressive. I want to mention my background is in forensic psychology. I was trained as a profiler by the FBI. And so my perceptions are formed and shaped by that kind of background and training. Now I advocate for whistleblowers and work for the Whistleblower Network News, which is an online magazine that every week I do a whistleblower profile, and the majority of these are revolving against around police officers who have blown the whistle on misconduct or illegal activity on their police force, and the consequences are horrendous. Donicus out of Africa comes to mind, who blew the whistle on death squads. Lodegar from here in the States, who defended a female subordinate, and they ran him out of service. And of course, up in Canada, we have several female whistleblowers who have been run out of the service, gaslit. Terrible things have happened to them. False fitness for duty. So I like to bring those stories to light so people can see what is going on in law enforcement. But I come to you today from the epicenter of the fight regarding the role of law enforcement. That is Minneapolis, St. Paul, Minnesota. In the last 5 years, the Twin City has, Minneapolis, St. Paul, has paid out $50 million in taxpayer monies to victims of police misconduct. Tim, you talked about watershed moments, and ours was with Derek Chauvin killing George Floyd on May 25th, 2020. You remember this because in the video, Chauvin had that 1,000-mile stare. He had 18 complaints against him in his 19-year career. But we not only had him in a 5-year period, we had Philando Castile, who was killed by Officer Yanez after Castile said that he had a weapon on him, and Yanez, who was extremely frightened, and he said that, shot him over in St. Paul. Another one is Justine Diamond in the last 5 years, who was shot by Mohammed Noor, who was fast-tracked onto the Minneapolis police. And he said in his trial that his training prompted him to fire his service weapon. And that's where I want to get back to after 9/11, which happened in the United States. The police services were weaponized. They were given equipment and money, and the idea was to weaponize them. And they received all this free. It wasn't until this watershed moment of George Floyd that people began to see what had happened to our police services. And they saw warrior training, which is a street name of Killaji, which the concept is it's better to be tried by 12 than carried by 6. And it is pounded into law enforcement that every person you meet is a possible threat. Our officers went through it in Minneapolis who were involved in in this training. And even after George Floyd and our mayor in Minneapolis stopped warrior training, which I want to tell you is conducted by ex-military. Here again, this concept of militarizing our law enforcement. He canceled this warrior training, and the union chief for law enforcement came out against the mayor and said, okay, from now on, we're going to give it away free. You don't have to pay for it. Because he felt, our union chief, that it was so important for officers to understand that every person they met was a threat. Justine Diamond from Australia was a small, petite, blonde woman, and she had called regarding a possible rape taking place in a good neighborhood in Minneapolis. Mohammed Noor said he was scared to death, fired across, he was in the passenger seat, fired across the driver seat where his partner was sitting, and shot her as she came up to the window. Fear-based, fear-based. Same thing with Philando Castile, fear-based. Comes to this warrior training, which violates this concept of community. That the values that go with the heart of community policing are non-existent in warrior training. Now, also during our time with President Trump, he also jumped on the bandwagon about police officers having, having this warrior training, which is really escalation. And I want to talk about, this idea of escalation before people say, well, that's certainly cerebral, Jane. What do you know? Well, I spent 14 years on Indian reservations by myself. And so I know a little something about the fear-based training. We were referred to as Indian fighters, which certainly did not go with community service.
Can I pause for a minute so we can bring in May-Britt, and then we'll come back round the room. So what I'm trying to do is get the context from everyone for a bit. So May-Britt, I'd like to come to you next, and at least start by focusing on the question of male violence from within policing, within your context, within the Swedish context. To what extent do you feel that it's a problem? And to any extent it's a problem, how you think it's understood within the police forces and within the context more broadly.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you.
Good evening to everyone, or good morning it might be in some of the countries that is joining in. Love to see you all. Thank you, Tim. This can be really interesting to listen to, because when I'm listening to my 4 female colleagues over here about the male problem, I do recognize this as being a problem many years back in the police service in Sweden. However, since the 70s, then I joined the police, it was not a problem within the police training. We couldn't say it at that time. We were quite equal to our male colleagues. It was when we came out to the police stations during the mid-70s that we could see that we had male colleagues that was not really happy about seeing female police officers. This had been an ongoing business for 11 years until then I joined. Legislation protect both genders or all genders within the human among humans. So this is something that we've been training quite hardly to police cadets through the years, and we have seen a dramatic improvement. So if I go back to the Me Too organization that, or movement that started, we had people coming forward talking about the 70s, the 80s, and early 90s. But all these are too old to bring to the court, because there is legislation in the country, so you can't bring old cases unless it's like a rape before you are a certain age, or it's a murder case that is not yet solved. So when it comes to harassments, and very rarely violent between police officers, both genders or mixed genders. So this is quite unknown to us. What we've been reading in the papers from UK, from USA, partly from Canada, Africa, we got reports from, due to the fact that we do UN missions in some of the African countries, but we can see this in also other countries where Swedish police officers are joining in to do different kind of mission work. I've been working during a time nearly 20 years for the internal affairs, and it's the internal affairs in Sweden that do the investigations. There are few criminal cases, extremely few, where police officers are the suspect or pointed out to be the perpetrator. If there are any, it might be a few per year. They wouldn't be of interest for the media unless it's a very high ranked police officer. Otherwise, it would be this particular person that need to be judged by the court and brought to justice. But it's nothing that the media would be bringing around. So when I listen to you, I do understand that there is a long journey for your countries and continents to go through, because we've been working hard with it for the past 35, 40 years to bring in an equal possibility for any gender that join the police. And there are also policies put in force where we should treat people within the police, our colleagues and staff members, just as we treat people outside. So there is no difference in legislation. The only time there is a difference in legislation would be if you will be found guilty for physical assault and you would end up in prison, even though it's just 1 month, you will not be a police officer any longer, and you need to leave the force. So the 1 month might be the justice in that case, because you will be out in redundancy after that month. Normally you might get like 2 months or 6 months in prison instead. But just because you will be unemployed after you're serving your time in prison, then it will be lower. So that's the only way to deal with for us. I understand that this is very different to what you experience in your countries. And to me, it's very interesting to listen to you, because I know the journey, and I do understand the differences when women are still in minority within the police force. And I have seen decline of women, particularly in UK during the pandemic, and particularly women in higher ranks during the pandemic as well. So I do hope that you will make a difference just by speaking and discussing this matter. Thank you,
So
Tim.
on that point, May-Britt, in the Swedish context, is the in terms of numbers at least of police officers at higher ranks, is there relative equality between men and women, or is there still some inequality?
Well, we normally say that if it's an equal opportunity for women, it would be 40-60 or 60-40, depending on male or female that are the larger number. And with high ranks, it's about 28-30, as it is of today, female police officers in the higher ranks. And when you look at numbers of female police officers, it's 35-38%. So we are very, very close to what we call equal opportunity within the numbers as well. 50-50 is not the number for us. It's,
No,
we
for
need
sure.
to reach 40, and then it would be, you wouldn't be noticed as a woman or a man
Yeah.
in your profession, and mostly you are not, because
Okay.
so you're the police officer or you belong to the police staff.
Thank you. Thank you. That's really interesting context and a contrast from the other 4 areas that we've had. Christine, I think you wanted to come in.
Yeah, I think it's really important to look at the wider cultural context, and it's interesting to hear everyone's experiences. And I think for me, it's important to acknowledge that the Commonwealth countries and colonialism does play a part in this. The British policing model is often held up as one of the best in the world. I would have said that a number of years ago, but as times have changed, I would tentatively disagree, and I've been in a unique position where I can compare and contrast North American policing models with the UK. And actually, one common theme from looking at the 30 by 30 initiative is around the way officers are dealt with after the incident. And it would appear to me there is a massive disparity behind how a member of the community victim of crime would be treated to how a female officer would be treated when they are reporting exactly the same crimes. So it's expected that within policing, and these have been my direct experiences, that if something is reported that is by definition a crime, as a police officer, you're expected to, well, deal with it through HR, shrug it off, think about how it will impact the rest of the team. If a police officer went to a woman's house and said to her, you know what, think about how this might affect everyone if you report this, and then maybe we'll get over it. Why? Why is this happening? Why are we expected to shoulder this significantly traumatic event that actually is not just one event, it can continue for a long, long time? And that is where we need to look at why this is happening. Why does it happen? Does anyone, if they're actually finally disciplined, does anyone actually say to them, why did you do this? And are we looking at, is this a stress response? Is this person getting the support they need? Is the training wrong? And so it's this sense of, well, if I report this, it's not that it won't be dealt with, it's just that they don't really care. Or if we shuffle the person along to the next force, it's not our problem. And having dealt with the media firsthand in issues like this, I know how that works, and it's incredibly frustrating. And so I also want to point out that as well, this is not just male on female, it happens with every gender, it happens within the LGBT officer community. And so it's not necessarily it's the men doing this, it's the officers that are somehow turning to this behaviour that perhaps before they joined, would they have done this? I'm not sure. And that's kind of where we need to look deeper into the psychology behind it, the cultural impact. The things that happened in the 80s and 90s to officers I know still happening now, yet we have more female officers in the UK than ever. Everyone thought that by having more female officers it would reduce these incidents. However, it hasn't. It's just put more female officers on there, who still feel marginalised, who still feel isolated, who still feel that if they report this, they're out.
Okay. Thank you, Christina. Does anyone want to come in on what Christina has just said? Susan, I think.
Yeah. So I think that is hitting the nail on the head in terms of these potentially criminal acts are being treated as labor issues, especially in Canada, depending on what it is, which almost signals that, it's a condition of your employment to have to put up with these things, these different, whether it's sexism, racism, misogyny, and it's all because of the foundation of policing organizations is rooted in patriarchy, as Grace was saying.
Okay. May-Britt, did you have a comment on this?
Yeah, I find it really interesting because what Christine is talking about is what we faced during the 70s and 80s. And then when it started to be known among the leadership how it was dealt with, we formed a policy that say that if a female officer would report any kind of harassment, bad behavior for a male colleague, whatever, it's the male colleague that need to move from the unit or from this particular force into another force. We are one national, but it's still regions and districts. So we moved the problem to somewhere during the investigation, and there is an investigation, because the officer that is badly treated can start to go to the first leadership, like the group leader, and report it. If he or she is the problem, then you go to the next level. And if there still is a problem, there will be a person that is neutral within the force, where you can give a call, you can walk into a room and give your complaint, or you can just send an email or a letter to them, and they will deal with it, as long as you give your name and contact details. So I have seen this through the years, where female officers are asked to keep quiet or to just live with it. And I have also seen the impact on these female officers, and also female staff members that are civilian staff members, and how badly they feel, and how badly that they are continue to be treated by even others that join into the same orchestra, because you make it legal, more or less, if you don't react to it. So I'm very happy to see that we have changed our behavior, and it's already in the basic training, where you talk about this, about the equal rights and possibilities within the police. And it's basically also in the defensive tactical training, how you act with different kind of persons that might be violent against you, or in a violent situation. And de-escalation is one of the main training things today, that also involve gender training, of course.
Okay, thank you. I want to bring in yourself, Grace, if I can. I was wondering, in the Nigerian context, if there's an allegation against a male police officer by a female colleague, how would that be treated within the police force? We've heard from May-Britt how it's treated in Sweden, and Christine and Susan have said that in their context they can be reduced to HR or labour issues, whereas in other contexts they might be considered as crimes. So in the Nigerian context, if a female officer makes an allegation against a male officer, how do you feel that would play out?
It's not much different. In Nigeria, the male officer is actually put under investigation. There have to be some form of investigation to find out, to verify what the woman says. But a lot of times, when the tables, the investigations are working against the suspect, the male officer, you find a lot of other males trying to intimidate her, to back off, and they are the majority in the system. So you even find some that go behind to offer her money just to drop the case. But when the evidences are really obvious, very, very obvious, and she presents them and they are out there, it's a bad case. There's nothing they can do, they just have to hands off. But where they can have a little window to manipulate the issues, then they begin to either intimidate her or offer her money or offer her, gratifications just to make her back off. Most times it is intimidation, and you find that without sufficient support, either from your family or from other female officers in the force, or a a legal, framework that supports you and protects you, then you just have to give in to all the threats. But it's actually a big deal. It's taken seriously by the organization, even though there is no legal framework, like I said. For example, in the United Nations, sexual exploitation and abuse or sexual harassment is a big deal, and there is a legal framework to deal with it. There are ways of reporting, there are ways that actually protect the victim. So, but we do not have that, but hopefully with this step being taken right now, we are getting there. As a matter of fact, the policy I'm telling you about, we found that from the 2010 policy we had, it was not taken seriously when you talk about policy in the police force. Any government can come and just decide not to do anything about it. So we have decided to put, once this is validated, we will now take a step further and reduce it to force orders. Force orders have a lot more legal implications. Force orders are like, the orders that are made by the force, where any government that comes, that order is still in force. It's not something that any management team can overlook. It is a force order. So that's our next plan. Once this is validated, then we'll reduce the salient sections to force order. And then we think further too from there. So it's a big deal. And once the evidences are so obvious, there have been, sanctions.
So what sort of sanctions? What sort of sanctions, if someone is in these really clear-cut cases where you say it is taken seriously, what would happen to the male officer? Would there be a criminal sanction? Would they be charged? Or is it dismissal and sort of redundancy?
No, there are departmental actions. For instance, the officer could be reduced in rank. The officer can also, depending on the severity, the magnitude of the case, the officer can be moved from a particular unit where he's working to another one, just like what May-Britt said, and then in very extreme cases, the officer could lose his job and then be, prosecuted. He can be dismissed from the force and handed over for prosecution. So it depends on, like I said, the weight of the evidence and of course the interest, because there are some cases where you have civil society actually putting it out there, actually watching over, because sometimes they can use time, they can buy time over it, so people forget. But where there are a lot of interest, a lot of eyes are on it, it becomes such that it cannot be manipulated.
Okay.
So,
thank you. That's really, really fascinating. Jane, I don't think we've heard from you about this sort of particular issue of how. So obviously, this is your expert area, whistleblowing, in that sense. But this tension between the policies that might be there and then how they are implemented within organizations or policing, law enforcement organizations, and whether things are reduced to HR issues or whether they're escalated to criminal issues, to put it crudely. I don't know whether you have any reflections on that. You're muted still.
Well, that's an interesting question, Tim. And, I have to point out that women in law enforcement are terribly underrepresented in the United States. To give an example, the state patrol, which, patrol the highways, there's only 7 nationwide that are women. The head of the Iowa State Patrol recently came out and said, because women tend to handle complaints or have less complaints because how they handle situations, he wants to add more women to the force. The problem comes once the women are on the force, and if they do lodge a complaint, which comes through very clearly in whistleblower cases, the resources are often turned against the whistleblower. And if a woman complains that she's being sexually harassed or something else, then she is an outlier, she's trouble. These are the standard things that come up. And it really is awful. And there seems to be a playbook. They're either going to term her a nut or a slut. And, you know, they go for fitness for duty. It's like the woman has stepped outside her gender role by confronting a male on their behavior. That is not what they want to see in law enforcement. And a director of the FBI has come out every year and said, we're really trying to get more women in because we seem to be stuck at this 10 or 12%. But in reality, he comes out and says that every year, different directors of the FBI, but they're really not trying to recruit women. So, you know, behind the scenes, everybody knows the game that's being played, which is we really don't want you in here. And that can be true ATF, DEA, and we really don't want you in here. But if you come in, here's the role you need to play. If you step outside that gender role, then it all comes down on you. And I've seen this several times with women whistleblowers who blow the whistle on males who, you know, are sexually harassing, doing misconduct. All of a sudden, the investigation is all about them. And it's really horrific. And I hope that changes someday. But I think what it's going to have to take is the administrators are going to have to change. Right now, there's not a huge amount of women in administrative roles. That's part of the problem. The other problem is they really don't want to change the mix that comprises their agency. That's the bottom line. They want
it's interesting to start as we've heard a very substantial problem from at least 4 of the 5 jurisdictions represented here. And it would be nice to start hearing about potential solutions, so that management, administrative change, and also we've heard of cultures that are supportive of abuse and misuse of male power within policing, and so how that can be tackled. Christine, you've got a comment. I think you want to come in. Sorry, Susan, you have a comment. Sorry, I saw a raised hand and it attached to the wrong person momentarily.
Worries. I just wanted to say further to what Jane was saying is that it's like a second assault, right? Mm-hmm. So, and another large issue is that, even, like Jane said, even if you hire more women, are they keeping data on retention? Are they being transparent about that? So you can have, even if you reach, let's say, gender parity or something close to it, are you maintaining that? What are the promotions in the ranks? So that's great. You've now have all these women here, but if they're leaving after 2, 3, 4, 5 years, that says something. What is happening within? And that really does need to change. And if the systems and the policies and procedures in place aren't actually being adhered to or implemented and then evaluated, there's no point in having them.
So is that part of the solution, do you think? There's some kind of, it sounds like you're a researcher like me. You're saying we need a research program to evaluate and describe what's going on. Or is transparency the issue, do you think, as to how policies are being applied?
Absolutely. So if we look at, principles of procedural justice, so this idea of transparency and neutrality in decision making and respect and allowing people to have a voice and dignity, all those principles are typically violated for victims. They're made to be silent. There's other measures of coercive control that are employed that then allow for that narrative to continue. And because there's no transparency, nothing changes. So organizations can say that they, are doing this, that, and the other. But until they're being transparent about how those initiatives are actually playing out, we don't actually have any idea if they are having the desire.
So how do we bring, sorry, I'm not putting you on the spot, out to the room. How do we bring this transparency? How do we create the change that you feel is necessary?
Well, I'm curious to know about, May-Britt, what happened in Sweden, but also here from our perspective, and well, my perspective is that it cannot be internal police investigating police. There has to be some sort of an outside agency or oversight body that is separate from typical police regime.
May-Britt, do you want to respond to Susan?
Well, one of the things that I think is what we've been lucky with is that we have been equally paid. There's been a neutral system for promotion. So we look at actually the information about the person and not on the gender when it comes to a promotion to a higher rank or a higher function within the police. And if there is also a possibility to appeal if that is not correctly done. We also got an internal control system that look at all these kind of things. So we look at the payment, we look at the numbers of women and male. We also look at the minority groups within the policing, that they are represented as good as we can. It's one of the crucial things for us right now to try to bring in more minority groups into policing. On the national level, we got the Ombudsman of Justice, who you can complain to if there been any injustice made in any kind of case that any state employee is involved into it.
So can I ask, is that what Susan was referring to as a body external to the police that would have responsibility for supervising investigations and so on?
Yeah. And even the government can decide to look into certain kind of issues within the state or government bodies. The police is one of those that is in the correct line from the government, because they give us the task what to do. And if we don't deliver in the way they expect us to do, that would be a complaint as well. So we do our very best to act as equal as we can, and also to recognize women and male in whatever they do. I also listened to some other little things, and I thought about the training again of police officers. Our training is 2 years at the police college, and then another 6 months under probation of an older police officer. So if you have any kind of value that is not correctly, that wouldn't fit into the Swedish police, that would be found through the vetting that you go through every so often during your training. And I think that could also be one of the things for some of the police in countries where you got a lot of police forces. And I know in USA there is a big variation of police training from just a few weeks up to half a year, but I talk about years. And then after that, you need to be ordinary police officer for quite a long time before you can apply for a higher position. And if it will be new vetting due to that, everyone will be looking at you for every little step you would like to do in the police. And as this is done neutral, it's not easy for you if you are misbehaving or are known for misconduct. You wouldn't be promoted. And if you will be found guilty for anything of this, you would be stopped in your promotion for a number of years, normally up to 2 years. You need to prove yourself to be a good officer after even a very, very small little tiny case where someone be complaining against you, and you would be found to have done this bad thing. But the control system, I think that is one of the really good things that we can see today, that we got our own internal control, and we also got the external control of how we behave in all the governmental bodies within the country. So with time, you will be a role model.
Okay, so Jane, do you have some comments on potential solutions and whether that's possible from your perspective and from what you've seen?
Oh, I certainly do. I have to tell you a little, just real quick. We had a supervisor who was sitting on women agents, and I complained to the OPR, Office of Professional Responsibility, about him, and OPR came in and questioned him, and he said, well, yeah, I did ask him out on dates, but I was always planning on bringing my wife, and they just they just let him, and he was a serial sexual harasser. But here's the problem. Susan is absolutely right. You have to go outside the organization to bring about some responsibility for this conduct. It's like what's happening with these rogue police officers now. For the first time, they're going to jail. This has put out the word in the United States, if you're careless and shoot somebody, you could go to jail. This has never happened before. The same thing has to happen in law enforcement regarding the harassment, the ostracizing, whatever is happening. There has to be consequences. In the United States, there are no consequences to these offenders, sexual offenders, misogynists. There are no consequences. In fact, they get promoted. We've seen it time and time again. And when I talk to the whistleblowers in my time in the Bureau, I saw it time and time again. And of course, what that you say, well, why would they promote? How can that be? Why would they promote the offender? Well, it's very simple. They're sending out the message that if you protect the organization, we will promote you. And in the meantime, they're banging on the victim as hard as they can. What is that message that the rest of the organization gets? If you're going to lodge a complaint, we're going to grind you into the dirt.
Yeah.
If you protect our reputation, we're going to promote you. It's that simple.
Yeah.
And you're upholding all the values that underpin that organization. Yeah.
That's correct.
It's really hard. To bring you in, Christine, do you think, I was thinking about responses from sort of other groups and so on. And the other obvious piece of this puzzle can be associations of police officers, police federations, police unions of certain sort. Can they be part of the solution, or are they part of the problem, do you think?
I think it's a bit of both. And when you look at historically how civilianisation has become bigger in UK policing, that has had a cultural shift, but you will then have the two unions up against each other in some respects. However, civilianising roles has brought a fresh light onto things that were previously acceptable. I think that there is a lot of power with unions, both positive and negative, and that needs to be looked at again at who is running the policy. But I kind of want to take it a step back from that, actually, because for me this is moving ahead and looking forward to how we can shift this in a faster period than a generational change, which is often bandied around. I haven't seen it and I doubt I will. But however, to me, it's about looking at behavioural change, and you can't make behavioural change until you understand the behaviour, and I don't think enough is done to understand behaviour. So in my time as a roads policing officer, I lost count of the number of people who would say, I would never drink drive. However, once the circumstances changed slightly, they would drink drive, but they didn't intend to. And it's my belief that, you know, we fully intend to take personal responsibility, and that's very important, personal and organisational responsibility when we join. And I speak also from experience that by joining the police, our window or our propensity for empathy is very much narrowed as we go through being a police officer. When you take out empathy, you are more likely to react in negative ways to stress. So for me, it's about understanding that behaviour. Why did they do it? And then providing the support before it happens. So in theory, this would be kind of like the taking away the keys before they get in the car after they've had a pint. In that context, it's like, well, are we actually in training talking more about mental health? Are we providing that support when we see someone go wobble on duty or off duty? And then what you'll have is this kind of pressure cooker environment where alcohol gets involved, stress, wanting to let off steam, and you can only talk to your colleagues, yet no one has supported you before you go that way instead of that way. And I think, yes, research is important, policy is important, but any diktat from a leader is not going to change anyone's behaviour. If you don't believe them, if they don't live by the words they, you know, tell you to live by, there's a lot of do as I say, not as I do. So why should you? So we need to reinstill that personal responsibility and look at what makes people do these things, because we've all had challenges in law enforcement that take into question or put into question our own ethics and morals and our belief in humanity. And it sounds like a really sort of big issue, but actually that's what it comes down to. These aren't police officers, they're people. And if we look at why people behave the way they do, this may be a way to change things.
Thank you, Christine. That's a really interesting thought and contribution. We're going to have to move to a stage where we're beginning to wind up. So I'm going to come around the room to each of you again, as we did at the beginning, and simply ask you for a reflection on something you've heard from one of the other jurisdictions or contexts that you think was particularly interesting or important, and that might be applied or would be difficult to apply even in your own context. So perhaps Susan, I can come to you first.
I'm very, very intrigued again by what May-Britt had to say about what Sweden has done. I'd be very curious to read more if there's been a case study or something that indicates how the change occurred. And if there's any recent kind of studies or anything that can show it, is that, do the frontline officers or do those impacted feel that that change has actually been made? I would be very interested and very curious. And, you know, further to what Christine said about why is the behavior happening and how do we change it? I think we need to look at larger societal levels, because there is still a lot of victim blaming, shaming, and there's, you know, undertones of gender-based stereotyping that permeate every level of society, and that goes beyond policing.
Okay, thank you. Grace, do you have any reflections on what you've heard from the other contexts and areas that we've heard from this evening? Oh, you need to unmute.
Thank you very much. I've listened to very insightful perspectives. Unfortunately, in Nigeria, we do not have the union system. The Nigeria police still has force, you know, ahead of it. So we cannot have unions. Mm-hmm. And so one of the strategies which we have been that has been in place and we are trying to reinforce is that of identifying gender champions, you know, across the different levels in the force, and try to, you know, reinforce them and work with them to be able to protect the women. in the different departments. So we identify these gender champions, who most times are men, of course, to be able to, because they know they have the language to speak to the men more, to be able to at least allow a level playing field where everybody is given equal opportunities to be able to, deliver their potentials and make the workplace a safe place for all genders. So this is one of the ways we have been working on to be able to stay safe and have a sane working environment. So it has been really helping, because you have men who at least they know what is right, and they decide to stand for it. They decide to say, okay, we are all together in this. Let's give everybody an opportunity. And a lot of times they are the ones that stand up to their own colleagues. I was also thinking maybe in the next episode, it might also be interesting to have one of the panelists to be a male, so we can actually hear their own perspectives. What do they think? Even though, you are moderating, but it will also—
no, I agree.
It will also make sense to have a panelist, so we can also hear from their own side what do they have to say, because it's important. And I also believe very strongly that it also has to do with a mental health issue, because it's not just normal for a person to see another person who also would feel bad when his dignity is under threat, doing the same thing you wouldn't want somebody else to do to you, to somebody else. It places a question mark on your mentality. So it will make sense for us to hear from them, from a male, to find out what the issues are, even though we already know we may learn something new.
Yeah.
Because we have had so many empirical evidences, but you never can tell. It might be an opportunity to learn something new. So that's what I have to say.
So thank you, Grace. So Jane, particularly reflecting on what you've heard from the other contexts and areas, I don't know whether you have any reflections or what might help in your context or so on. You're muted still.
All of these panelists have just been sparkling. And like Susan, I think that Sweden I'd really be interested to see how they got to where they're at. The FBI has been infused with anti-women agent sentiment since J. Edgar Hoover said that females were not suited to be FBI agents. And I spent 25 years proving him wrong. But I really hope that we get someday to the point where a woman doesn't have to be 10 times better than a male before they're accepted as a law enforcement person.
Okay. Thank you. May-Britt, you're being held up as a paragon of how to do it in Sweden. What did you feel hearing the other stories and tales that you've heard?
Well, I can understand the journey that all these countries that are present today in this panel need to do, and also that it will take years and it will take a lot of female power and male power to make it come through. But one advice is that start with every citizen, because if we are not teaching our children, girls and boys, that they are equal, and that they need to respect each other, whoever they are, we will never reach to it. And this was actually started in the Swedish schools during the 1960s. And this is what I taught my children and today teach my grandchildren. They need to see that one person is not the norm, but one person can give you the possibility to be a good citizen, and also to see that everything is possible for you. There is nothing impossible. And Jane, you are possible. So that is one of the things I think about FBI, that they've never realized until it went to be too late and you left. So, and if we look at each other, that we are all possible for the citizenship, that would be so much easier. And I thought about Christine when she spoke about the police federation. The police union, as it is in Sweden, has also done the same kind of journey. Even they came a few years behind, because it was a quite male thing from the beginning to be a member of the union board. But what they did was that they did female mentorships to recruit persons females into the boards, just to make it possible for female as well to make the difference within the police. And this was also made by the other unions that are present within in the Swedish police force, because we have got 4 different unions, but there's one particularly for police officers. But we can't do it just as profession for police officers. It needs to be the full society. Everyone around us needs to do the same journey, and that went to be possible due to the price of the government, because they put legislation onto private companies, onto all the governmental bodies, municipalities, everyone. They had to work with equal opportunities. And this is the journey that you will have ahead. It will take you 25 years, 30 years if you are lazy. But I think you're not lazy. So you will have a faster journey than we had. So best luck to you and keep safe. Thank you.
Okay. And Christine, coming to you last in this round, I think. Do you have any reflections on what you've heard? Yeah.
I do. I mean, this is not, there's no silver bullet for this. It's going to be a number of points that need to come together holistically to make this change. Fundamentally agree in extending training. The training should be long, it should be arduous, and it should be challenging, and it should seek to have people question their beliefs and morals. Considering it's a people business, we don't really do much to actually understand people. So that needs to change. Policies, absolutely, but I feel that fundamentally there needs to be a change in language and approach to communication, working with media, community engagement as well, to change the narrative of policing in general will have a positive impact on those who serve in policing as well. So there's this kind of tough relationship there that actually, you know, impacts upon each other, and it's a bit chicken and egg, but fundamentally it is about starting that ensuring that there's better vetting way in advance before you get in. There needs to be full vetting throughout on your activities around social media, for example, and then it needs to be that there is a robust and clear policy for all to deal with behaviour and unwanted behaviour without fear of not having enough resources. So that there are a lot of aspects to this that need to come together to improve things, and it's not going to happen overnight, but there are certain things that can be done right now, and there are things that need to be considered in the future and more strategically, and also this comes down to Susan's mentioned about transparency, also the accountability of people who move between forces. I know that is catching up here in the US. There are programs around to make sure that people who do something wrong in Texas can't then go and work in New York, for example. There needs to be an international sharing of information about officers and staff. This isn't just police officers that do these things. There are administrative staff, and also removing that elitism in policing. it's considered to be a gang, or you know, the club, and if you don't quite fit into what they believe is right as a police officer should be, then you're not in. That's it, you're out. So breaking down that elitism is very important. But initially, I believe we're in a good place to get started, and there's a lot of work to do. But I'm really encouraged by hearing from people who have different experiences but have that same aim and passion to change things for the better for people coming after us.
Okay, thank you very much, and my great thanks to all of you as our expert panel for this episode. It's been a real privilege to moderate this episode, and to hear this discussion and hear all the views that you've expressed, and the international contrast in talking around these issues, I feel has been really valuable, because we you know, there is real learning from one to the other in lots of different ways in terms of cultures and stages on a particular journey, and so on and so forth. So once again, I'd like to offer my thanks to Grace Longe, to Susan Rabichuk, to JaneTurner, to May-Britt, Ronnebro, and to Christine Townsend. And thank you very much for participating. And I hope you've all enjoyed our episode today as much as I have. Thank you.
Thank you.